Very good afternoon to all of you, and most welcome to this important session on journalist workshop on the Indo-Pacific Regional Cooperation. In fact, a warm welcome to also to the students of journalism and a couple of ISB students and the IR scholars whom we have also invited for this session. In fact, ISB in partnership with the US Consulate Hyderabad is happy to organize this workshop, and we look forward for a very productive and active participation from all of you. I would like to start today's proceedings with a quote from our Honorable External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, who wrote in his book, The India Way, that he dealt a lot about the Indo-Pacific theater in his book. So he says that the Indo-Pacific naturally means different things to different powers, but it undeniably is a priority to all of them. So if you see India's beyond Act East is actually the space that he talks about. For Japan, it is a strategic evolution. For US, it talks about convergences when it comes here. And for Russia's Far East, and when it comes to Europe's, it's a return to the region that which they withdrew earlier. And for China to show its maritime capabilities and are the prerequisites for its emergence as a global power. So he continues saying that this is unquestionably the arena for the contemporary version of the great game, where multiple players with diverse ambitions display their strategic skills. So their efforts at building convergences and understanding contestations will have particular importance as it takes place on a global lifeline. So page number 182, he goes on talking about that. So this quote actually makes it somewhat clear that the entire Indo-Pacific theater is a very complex one. And it needs to be understood in a very systematic manner. And it is this reason that which made us to come together to organize such a series of workshops and bring forward the best minds in the field for the benefit of different stakeholders. So the objective of arranging these sessions is to help with systematically understand the space and not necessarily for reporting about the workshop per se. So maybe you should build on this and come up with stories. And from our side, our media team, Samuel and others, and also from the media team from the US Consulate, they're here to help us and guide through us and connect with a lot of players who could help us in building a lot of articles and stories around Indo-Pacific. So with this brief note, I would like to welcome and I would like to invite my senior colleague Kumar Guru, Director External Relations ISB, to deliver welcome remarks. Guru has been instrumental in establishing critical connects for the school. He has been a backbone, and one such important connect is the current partnership with the US Consulate with ISB. Over to you, Guru.
Thanks a lot, Sridhar. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a great pleasure to be here with all of you. Of course, it still continues to be virtual, even though one would have hoped and wished that these things could, as was prevailing earlier as normal circumstances, would have been in person. But one of the benefits, if at all one can use that phrase of the pandemic, has been that the digital sort of approach has enabled us to convene people from different geographies with relatively ease in terms of time, effort, and so on. So I think we are trying to make the most of it. As Sridhar said, at ISB, we value the partnership with the US Consulate here in Hyderabad and the US Mission in India. And we've been strong partners for several years now. As part of that effort is to try, and as a school which believes that we believe in ourselves as a very entrepreneurial school, part of the thing that we try and do is to push the boundaries in terms of trying to go beyond a traditional management education, beyond traditional business management education that we try and teach our students. So one of the things that this initiative on capacity building in this space in the Indo-Pacific context and is part of a larger initiative which will culminate early next year in the form of a conference, which will, fingers crossed, be in person here in Hyderabad. But as part of that, we've been running these workshops targeting journalists, students, and scholars of international relations and other stakeholders. And it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you here. And I request you all, I sort of encourage all of you to sort of make the most of it. I do want to sort of acknowledge the presence of one of our speakers this afternoon, who we are looking forward to his session, Admiral Lanba, former Chief of Naval Staff and the Chairman of the National Maritime Foundation here. So thank you very much for joining us. I know there'll be a more detailed introduction and welcome, but I will just wanted to acknowledge your presence and more importantly for taking time out to be part of this initiative and sharing your knowledge. Dane Robbins, who's the political officer at the US Embassy in Delhi. Dane, thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to your comments in just a minute or two. And again, like I mentioned earlier, do take time to visit us when your travels bring you to Hyderabad. Sunil, our sort of partner in crime at the Consulate. Thank you very much, Sunil, for your support and partnership. To all our friends who have joined us, irrespective of your backgrounds, as Sridhar mentioned, I just wanted to reiterate that point. This workshop per se is not for the purpose of reporting. We want you to think of this as what it is meant to be, which is a master class. Understand the very complex nature of Indo-Pacific, perhaps better than you were at the beginning of this workshop, thanks to the sort of 4 brilliant speakers that we have lined up today and on Monday. And then use this knowledge to go back and inform you better when you report and write about the subject. So that's our objective and that's our hope. And for those of you who are students or scholars in the international relations space, hopefully this will inform your area of research, your area of education, and make you better students and better scholars. With those words, I want to keep my comments very brief. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and back to you, Sridhar.
Thank you, Guru, for welcoming and setting the context. May I now invite Dane Robbins, political officer, political session of the United States Embassy to India, and request him to talk about the US foreign policy on the Indo-Pacific cooperation, especially in the background of the current changes that are going on. Dane is actually as a US diplomat who served in many parts of the world, Washington, DC, Kyrgyzstan, Australia, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and many other places. In fact, he closely studied Chinese society, economy, and polity by doing a master's in Chinese studies from the University of Nottingham. He also taught English at the University of Wuhan, China, for almost 3 years. Over to you, Dane.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. Very nice to talk to all of you this afternoon. So today I'll be speaking about the United States-India partnership and its vital role in the future of the Indo-Pacific. So when I was preparing my remarks a couple of days ago, my 7-year-old daughter walked into my home office and she asked me what I was doing. And so she asked me to read a few words of my remarks. So I started off, and I think I maybe even read a sentence and a half. And then she told me I did a really good job and walked out of the room. So I hope you enjoy my presentation as much as she did, but that you are able to pay attention for a little bit longer. So as Dr. Bhagavatula said, each nation, or the Minister Jaishankar said that each nation has a slightly different view of the Indo-Pacific. So I'll give you the US perspective now. So the Indo-Pacific is accepted as a clear geographical region spanning from the west coast of the United States to the west coast of India, and it excludes no nation. It is the center of the world's attention and economic growth, largely made possible by free, open, and rules-based order that has enabled countries to prosper as sovereign states. The region accounts for over half of the world's population and 58% of the world's youth. The Indo-Pacific represents 60% of the world's gross domestic product and 2/3 of the global growth in GDP. It is also home to some of the world's largest militaries. So because of the salience of this region, it is important that the United States promote a shared vision for the Indo-Pacific to build a consensus that sovereign nations will prosper through respect for freedom of commerce, a rules-based order, and the peaceful resolution of disputes in accordance with international law. This vision is based on a responsibility to promote peace and prosperity in the region and drive sustainable growth and development. A prosperous region is one that is economically joined together through integrated supply chains, joint vision, and shared standards. All of these elements will feature prominently in this year's Indo-Pacific Business Forum on October 28th and 29th. So we are proud that this year, the government of India will be joining the United States as co-host for the forum. This is the first time the event will be organized in South Asia, and you are all invited to attend. So if you're interested, you can do a web search for Indo-Pacific Business Forum and then register on the website. So this forum is the premier US government-sponsored business event in the region and presents a unique opportunity for all to connect with business and government leaders from the United States, India, and across the Indo-Pacific. A free, open, and prosperous Indo-Pacific is a national priority for the United States, and we need to be active in the region to address both new and traditional threats. There are threats that cross borders faster than ever, including diseases, climate change, and terrorism. There's no better example than the COVID-19 pandemic, which continues to cause suffering and disruption across the world. We also recognize that traditional threats remain with us. There are still nation states seeking to unilaterally redraw borders, take territory from their neighbors, and undermine the sovereignty of independent countries with that trap diplomacy and waging disinformation campaigns. Obviously, this has a huge effect on South Asia especially and across this region. To confront these challenges and sustain the rules-based international order that has allowed for the growth and global prosperity, like-minded partners must come together. So this has certainly been the case in the US-India relationship. We believe it's one of the cornerstone relationships of Indo-Pacific cooperation. Even as the new administration came into office in America, and despite the challenges in both our countries from the COVID-19 pandemic, our bilateral relationship has had a very busy and very productive 2021 so far. The historic pace of top-level engagement began with the visit of Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and the first ever Quad leader-level summit in March. In July, Antony Blinken made his inaugural visit to India as the Secretary of State. And of course, President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris just had the opportunity to welcome Prime Minister Modi to the White House at the end of September. There, he participated in the first ever in-person Quad Leaders Summit with President Biden and the leaders of Japan and Australia. I'll speak more about the Quad later. So this steady pace of high-level engagements has served to expand the sheer scope of initiatives we partner on that have a profound impact on the Indo-Pacific and the world. To name but a few examples of our bilateral engagement, on cybersecurity, we're working together to strengthen critical infrastructure and address shared cyber threats. We are together catalyzing investment in sustainable infrastructure in the places that demand it the most, including Africa, Southeast Asia, and beyond. In the past year, the National Institutes of Health funded nearly 200 research awards with collaborations involving Indian partners. We also will convene a trade policy forum later this year to enhance bilateral trade. So private sector partnerships are very important to our bilateral relationship as well. Advanced US engines power India's indigenous Tejas fighter aircraft, for example, and US companies manufacture in India components for commercial planes that connect people in places around the world and help expand India's civil aviation sector. Our cooperation on defense and security issues is just as deep and far-ranging. Through our Counterterrorism Joint Working Group and Homeland Security Dialogue, we strengthen our joint capacity to defend our peoples and borders from terrorists and those who wish us harm. As major defense partners, we have concluded 4 major defense enabling agreements since 2016. We continue to increase our information sharing and the interoperability of our forces. We are also expanding our joint efforts to protect the planet and power the future. The United States supports India's ambitious goal of deploying 450 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030, including through the recently revamped Strategic Clean Energy Partnership. We've launched a public-private hydrogen task force and a biofuels task force to expand the use of clean energy technologies and decarbonize the energy sector. These are significant developments as we look forward to the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow that begins later this month, COP26. Underpinning everything in our relationship are people-to-people ties. For example, the United States issued a record 62,000 visas to Indian students already in 2021. We partner on higher educational exchanges, on economic empowerment and entrepreneurship, and on scientific and oceanic research through a variety of mechanisms. The sheer variety of programs and initiatives on which the United States and India cooperate is far too great to list here in full. What I've listed already is a drop in the bucket, and I think I still went on for a little bit too long. But each and every one of these efforts changes lives, increases prosperity, and deepens the partnership between our two peoples and countries. So finally, the Quad is a perfect example of a results-oriented grouping that can lead on a variety of challenges in the Indo-Pacific. In the latest meeting in September, President Biden, Prime Minister Modi, Australian Prime Minister Morrison, and Japanese Prime Minister Suga agreed to expand cooperation on climate change and critical technologies, and also announced new working groups to enhance quadrilateral collaboration on space and infrastructure. There are also ongoing Quad initiatives on clean energy, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, cybersecurity, maritime security, resilient supply chains, and approaches to 5G infrastructure deployment that leverage open and interoperable network architectures. The four Quad countries are also on track to meet a massive joint commitment that will play a huge role to help end the pandemic. With Indian manufacturing, US technology, Japanese and American financing, and Australian logistics capability, the Quad will deliver over 1 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines to ASEAN, the Indo-Pacific, and beyond by the end of 2022, reaching over 1/7 of the world's population. In fact, next Monday, US International Development Finance Corporation Chief Operating Officer David Marchik will travel to Hyderabad for a big announcement on the Quad vaccine initiative. He will sign a historic agreement to open a new facility with substantial vaccine manufacturing capabilities to increase, and this will fulfill President Biden's commitment to substantially increase vaccine supply across the Indo-Pacific. In addition, the Quad countries agreed to closely coordinate our diplomatic policies towards Afghanistan and to deepen our counterterrorism and humanitarian cooperation in the months ahead, reaffirming that Afghan territory should not be used to threaten or attack any country, or to shelter or train terrorists, or to plan or to finance terrorist acts. So during his discussion on September 24th in Washington, D.C. with Prime Minister Modi, President Biden made a prediction. He said the relationship between India and the United States, the largest democracies in the world, are destined to grow stronger, closer, and tighter, even than it already is, and in a way that would benefit the entire world. We in the US Embassy in New Delhi and in Mission India wholeheartedly agree. Ladies and gentlemen, it's becoming increasingly clear that our country's deepening bonds of friendships are a strategic imperative for both the United States and India. As the relationship moves forward and deepens to realize the visions of our leaders, the US-India partnership has the potential to deliver ever greater benefits for India, the United States, and people across the Indo-Pacific. I'd like to thank you very much for your time today. I hope this has given you a better understanding of the US perspective on the Indo-Pacific. And I will conclude my remarks here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for laying the US perspective very clearly. And of course, you have touched upon various aspects like Quad, importantly, and of course, Afghanistan, developments in Afghanistan. So I'm sure things are clear now. I'm very thanks for making it. We'll now quickly move on to the next part of the proceedings, the master sessions. The first one on the theme is emerging scenarios in the international relations that challenge the Indo-Pacific regional cooperation. And the second one coming up is more from an international law perspective to arrive at an international legal order during power transition. Of course, we have seen that there are a lot of power transitions happening across the world, leadership changes in various countries. So all these and many developments like the developments in Afghanistan, emergence of AUKUS, the new quads like the India, US, UAE, Israel partnerships that are coming up, the EU and UK's approach towards the Indo-Pacific is also coming up very strongly. And all these developments actually make things a bit complex, and it's important for us to understand the dominant thought processes. So to understand these changes and challenges systematically, we have with us none other than Admiral Sunil Lanba, the 23rd Chief of Naval Staff, Indian Navy, and currently the Chairman of National Maritime Foundation. Let me have the pleasure to briefly introduce him. Is a person with 4 decades of naval experience. Admiral Lanba is a specialist in navigation and aircraft direction, and has served both the Eastern and Western fleets in the Indian Navy. Like INS Kakinada, INS Himagiri, INS Ranvijay, INS Mumbai were under his command in different time frames. He was also the executive officer of aircraft carriers INS Virat and fleet operations officer of the Western Fleet. With multiple tenures on the training staff of India's premier training establishments, Admiral Lanba has been deeply engaged with personal training and shaping of India's future leadership and the skilling of the officials of the Indian Armed Forces. Admiral Lanba is an alumnus of prestigious institutions like the National Defence Academy, the Defence Service Staff College at Wellington, the College of Defence Management and Secunderabad, and the Royal College of Defence Studies in London. His leadership at different levels were critical as he could successfully implement some of the important changes like training methodology for Indian Navy, coastal security with multi-agency coordination mechanism, strengthening Navy's combat capabilities, and giving a thrust on infrastructure development. For his exceptional service to the nation, the President of the Republic of India awarded Admiral Lanba the Ati Visisht Seva Medal and the Param Visisht Seva Medal. He is also the honorary aide-de-camp to the President, and on June 7, 2019, he took over as the chairman of the National Maritime Foundation. Before giving the virtual mic to Admiral Lanba, just a couple of statutory things. Admiral Lanba will address us for half an hour or so, and will be very keen to interact with you all and respond to your queries. Request you to type your queries in the QA session so that we can pick it up during QA, and also we'll call you and also ask question. At the end of the session, we will share a small feedback form, which will hardly take 2 minutes. So request you to fill it so that it will help us improving further. Over to you, Admiral Lanba.
Thank you, Dr. Sridhar. Dr. Sridhar, Dr. Kumar, Guru, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all of you. At the outset, I'd like to thank the International School of Business for inviting me, and it's indeed a privilege for me to address this workshop today afternoon. I think there is little dispute over the assertion that the world today is characterized by multi-layered and multifaceted diversities from political, demographic, economic, environmental, and strategic viewpoints. But why are these times so important from a strategic perspective? That is largely because everything around us seems to indicate that the world is in another period of historical transition. And therefore, I believe that it would be a fair assumption that we are indeed living through a period of strategic uncertainty. As I see it, there are 3 main global drivers which are of particular concern to us as they would shape our world and our collective futures in profound ways. The implication of these drivers are broad and varied, and they present us with tremendous opportunities and as well as dangerous risks, which will need to be mitigated. The first of these pertains to the ongoing shift in the technological center of gravity from the west to the east. And as a result, the technological superiority enjoyed by the West is under challenge from the East. In fact, the technological gap is narrowing between the West and the East, particularly in the field of advanced technologies, many of which have military application. China is investing huge sums and leading in artificial intelligence, 5G, cloud computing, hypersonic missiles, to name just a few. Coupled with the technological driver is the economic matrix, and by that I mean the ongoing rebalancing of global economies, which is leading to a shift in global economic clout to Asia. The next driver pertains to the increasing world population and rising living standards. In addition to the social aspect, the growing military aspirations of China and its corresponding impact on quest for resources cannot be overemphasized. These factors are leading to a steep increase in demands of all resources, including food, water, energy, and rare earth materials. On the military front, as can be seen around us, this quest for gaining access and control over resources is manifesting itself, particularly in the global commons, be it the ocean, the polar regions, space, or even the cyber world. And the third and last driver would be the impact of climate change, particularly from the prism of environmental, security, and economic aspects. Having spoken about the drivers fueling the future global narrative, I would now share with you my views on three important strategic trends which emerge out of these drivers, either as a direct outcome or an enmeshed output of more than one of them. First of these pertain to the ongoing power transition and diffusion. As the economic, military, and technological power of China rises, it is rivaling that of the United States of America. As global power becomes more contested, it will become harder to forge internationally binding treaties, and non-compliance and subversion of international laws are likely to increase, as is already happening. And I think the prime example being the UNCLOS, where China has been cherry-picking the rules to its own advantage. The next trend pertains to the potential for increased competition. And lastly, as a result of increasing competition, there is wide scope of regional instability, as we see in the South China Sea or across the Taiwan Straits. And post the COVID pandemic, there is also a re-look by a number of nations at the global supply chain. And in my opinion, once they start to bite, it's going to have a global and a profound impact. The geopolitical significance of the Indo-Pacific region has grown in the past decade for a number of economic, political, and other reasons. The region today is home to the top 4 of the 10 top economies, has emerged as one of the fastest growing economic regions in the world. Riding on the wave of globalization, several countries of the region have emerged as global powerhouses in manufacturing as well as the services sector, contributing to about 60% of global GDP. The economic resurgence of the region has raised the strategic competition amongst regional and extra-regional powers. Transactional trade mechanisms invoking historical trade routes or vision of shared destiny have thus come to prominence amongst the established and emerging economies. The economic driver is shaping the political landscape of the region with far-reaching security and strategic implications for regional and the global order. The region is also home to 10 largest standing armies in the world and 7 of the top 10 countries in terms of global military expenditure. The rising military power and the aggressive behavior of China has come to complicate the security calculus in a number of ways. The seaways of the Indo-Pacific host a major share of international trade, hydrocarbon, bulk and container. Importantly, about 80% of the trade originating from here is actually extra-regional. And the Indian Ocean alone, 50% of global seaborne trade and 40% of world oil supply is carried over the international sea lanes by over 1 lakh ships each year. Unhindered flow of maritime trade through Indo-Pacific region thus assumes tremendous significance for the entire world. Let's now look at the strategic challenges in the Indo-Pacific. Increased activity throughout the Indo-Pacific due to expanding regional and global trade in goods, ideas, people, and resources has raised a new set of maritime security challenges. With the rising China, the ongoing power transition and diffusion, which I mentioned earlier, merits serious consideration. The balance of power in the future may not be as homogeneous as what we have witnessed in the past, but in fact is acquiring different character and proportions at the regional and sub-regional levels. A crucial question is therefore whether the current institution, mechanisms and norms of the international system can adapt and accommodate this shifting balance of power. If it cannot, disputes will be more difficult to resolve and these could escalate into conflicts. A unique blend of strategized financial aid, creeping territorial aggression, information operations, legal ambiguity and military assertiveness is being wielded by China to establish regional dominance in the Indo-Pacific region. On multiple occasions over the last few years, instances of such assistance being offered for projects with suspect financial viability, limited local participation, and unequal benefit for the recipients have come to light. Some projects have also arguably been undertaken slowly to support political and strategic designs with almost no benefit to the locals. It is therefore necessary to establish an environment where multiple options are available to countries seeking financial assistance, allowing them to avoid getting entrapped by those with unscrupulous designs. At the same time, realignment of national priorities in some countries, dilution of long-standing international arrangements, changes in the global geoeconomic balance have resulted in the perceived change in the global order. The Indo-Pacific region has seen the most active and assertive manifestation of strategic maneuvering, which characterize such transition. China in particular has embarked on major geopolitical missions to gain influence in the Indo-Pacific region. In the politico-military context, this translates into a concerted effort to establish capabilities which enable dominance over the region's shipping lanes and choke points. The contest for regional influence is manifesting itself into significant military buildup by regional as well as extra-regional powers in a bid to ensure and pursue their strategic interest. In particular, China's maritime buildup in the last 3 decades remains a serious cause of concern. The PLA Navy modernization program appears to be proceeding at a rapid pace in consonance with the PLA Navy's stated intent to become a global navy by 2050. Similarly, other countries in the region are also making greater investments in acquiring modern warfighting capabilities across multiple domains. And the signing of the AUKUS is a one-of-a-kind project to build 8 nuclear power submarines for Australia will be a game changer and bring new capabilities in the Indo-Pacific region. The collective impact of this enhanced maritime force buildup in the region merits serious thought and consideration. The need for greater collaborative measures on on the maritime commons would remain fundamentally important in maintaining the strategic equilibrium in the Indo-Pacific. The growing military aspiration of China and its corresponding impact on quest of resources cannot be overemphasized, in my opinion. These factors are leading to a steep increase in demand for all resources, including food, water, energy, and rare earths, as I mentioned earlier. China's maritime dependency and hence economy are steadily growing, and hence the focus on its maritime capacity and capability. To meet its burgeoning oil and commodity demand, China is rapidly growing its merchant fleet. Its influence on global shipping market is substantial. It controls 20% of the world's container fleet. Last year, it constructed more than 40% of newly built ships. It's the largest ship manufacturing country in the world. By 2030, Chinese companies are expected to own more than a quarter of global merchant fleet, ensuring a continuous supply of raw materials and delivery of its manufactured goods throughout the world. Thus, the insecurity of China vis-a-vis its sea lines of communication is quite palpable. The maritime path followed by China can be seen in various defense papers which it has published. In the 2015 paper on military strategy and the way it behaves in the real world, an analysis of 11 white papers, especially the paper on maritime strategy, endorses the fact that China's stance has been consistent in its pursuit of maritime supremacy. She seeks a larger role for herself in the Indo-Pacific and the world, with emphasis on building itself as a maritime power, maintaining continued presence in relevant sea areas, and taking actions to contribute to regional and global security through military presence and cooperation. China seeks to equate itself to the United States of America and has named its principal threats as the United States, Japan, activities in the South China Sea by other nations, terrorist activities in East Turkmenistan, and separatist tendencies in Tibet. However, we must also remember that reunification of Taiwan will always be one of its main national interests after the first tasking of the PLA, which is to ensure the survival of the Communist Party of China. She knows the importance of the seas and oceans for stability and development. Hence, we see a strong emphasis on guarding its maritime rights and interests, SLOCs, and overseas interests. If we are to consider holistic maritime security is a key to stable, secure, and peaceful maritime environment, then there is a need for working together towards laying a bedrock of a strong, holistic maritime security arrangement in the Indo-Pacific. The Quad has gained center stage in the past 3 years, but in my opinion, Quad will be a non-defense, non-military arrangement. And to quote US Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, in a recent visit to India, and I quote, Quad is a vehicle which largely operates in the security realm that are non-military, non-defense. Things we do together on vaccine, infrastructure, supply chain, technology, and climate change. All the forward-thinking areas in which we need to gain confidence and ensure security for our people, unquote. Also elucidated by our External Affairs Minister, Shri Jaishankar, during the second Quad ministerial meeting, which was conducted in Tokyo, that advancing security and economic interests of all countries having legitimate and vital interests in the Indo-Pacific remains a key priority. We therefore need to work together and carry the Indo-Pacific nations with us and hence ensure a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific region under the ambit of a rule-based international order. We have seen the inclusion of Australia in the Malabar exercise, and in the past 3 years, as I just mentioned, Quad gaining center stage. Like it or not, Malabar series and Quad are symbiotically connected, and this is an aspect which we need to accept and work on. As I said earlier, Quad, in my opinion, will be a non-military alliance, but will continue to undertake military activities and exercise, especially in the maritime domain, like the Malabar exercise. When we look at the Indo-Pacific region, China will always be central to all discussions concerning the Indo-Pacific, whether it is on freedom of navigation, code of conduct, lawfare, or aggressive posture and action. In my opinion, one solution is to limit or deny strategic space to China, and that the new rules are not written by China. And this is where Quad can play a very important role. The Indo-Pacific region is becoming widely recognized as a global center of gravity, whether in terms of economic interaction, demographic, transnational security challenges, or the strategic balance. An unhindered flow of maritime trade through the Indo-Pacific region is one of the primary security concerns of global energy consumers. From a maritime security perspective, the unprecedented development in the Indo-Pacific could not have been possible in an insulated environment. The region's critical role as the prime mover of global economic progress makes it a strategically important agenda for regional as well as extra-regional power. India envisions the Indo-Pacific as a free, open, and inclusive region which embraces all in the common pursuit of progress and prosperity. We seek to work with all stakeholders to evolve a common rule-based order for the region, which respects sovereignty, territorial integrity, and equality of all nations irrespective of size and strength. Inclusivity and transparency are fundamental to India's Indo-Pacific formulation. In the recent past, we have witnessed a strategic convergence between India's conceptualization of the Indo-Pacific and those of Australia, the ASEAN, the EU, France, Germany, Japan, and the United States of America. Inclusivity implies the use of existing regional mechanisms to promote dialogue-based approaches to the resolution of differences, the enhancement of economic cooperation, and sharing of maritime space and airspace, and the willingness to work with all countries in the region. Our Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi, has introduced the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, which is a deeply interconnected web of 7 main spokes, namely maritime security, maritime ecology, maritime resources, trade connectivity and maritime transport, capacity building and resource sharing, disaster risk reduction and management, and science, technology, and academic cooperation. Upon this framework lies the aspirational framework of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, or CDRI. Once again, an Indian initiative, and once again, with enormous beneficial potential at national and regional levels. These developments, seen against the backdrop of India's maritime policy of Sagar, or security and growth for all in the region, whether taken singularly or in aggregate, has generated a number of maritime geostrategies that will define geopolitics in the 21st century. India has always supported the very essence of freedom of the sea and upheld its attributes as a global common. Implicit in India's policy and maritime strategy has been the desire for free movement of people, goods, services, and investment across the region. And security of sea lines of communication, freedom of navigation, availability of port infrastructure, non-discriminatory access to markets are some of the issues that ensue from this definition of interests. We seek to work alongside partners with shared values and interests, bilaterally, trilaterally, or more, to establish a stable and peaceful Indo-Pacific region. I'd also like to repeat the words of Honorable Prime Minister who said, and I quote, "Our friendships are not alliances of containment. This is the spirit with which we will continue to deepen and expand our cooperation with our friends in all domains across the region. We will work with them to keep our seas, space, and airways free and open, and our nation secure from terrorism." Unquote. Let me conclude my address by stating the holistic maritime security needs to be based upon these common denominators. That is, the first, development of maritime expanse of the Indo-Pacific as a free, open, and inclusive space founded upon a set of internationally accepted and consensually derived behavioral rules, norms, and practices. Second, respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of all nations. Thirdly, respect for international law while promoting and assuring freedom of navigation and overflight. Next, promotion of peaceful dialogue to resolve maritime differences, disagreements, and disputes. And finally, cooperative and collaborative approach to all security-related issues which seek to enhance regional stability, ensure regional security, and promote and preserve peace. These provide us ample areas in which to cooperate, and indeed, cooperation in some of these areas is already underway a bit at a sub-regional level. And to ensure convergence within the Indo-Pacific, there is a need to link these endeavors at the political and strategic operational level. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Admiral Lanba, for such a wonderful address. In fact, you have laid down a good structure where you touched upon various aspects like Quad and important partnerships that are currently undertaken. We will now open the floor for discussion. But before others start thinking and picking up the questions, I would like you to comment on the other partnerships that are coming up within the Indo-Pacific region, or maybe across also, like the Quad, the India, US, Israel, and UAE partnership that has recently come up. How do you see those developments in the larger context of Indo-Pacific?
See, I'll cover Quad later. This thing, the recent meeting of the so-called new Quad of United States, Israel, UAE, and us is a step in the right direction. Israel and UAE are situated in a very volatile region.
Yeah.
The Middle East or West Asia is a major supplier of petroleum products or crude oil, which India is heavily dependent upon. Almost close to 85% of our requirement is met, our energy requirement, or 93% of our energy requirement is met from overseas resources.
Correct.
So this formulation, as it is, UAE and Israel are important strategic partners. UAE is also a very among the top 3 or 4 trading countries, trading partners with India. So these are like-minded countries coming together where there will be congruence of effort, cooperation, and it can flow out from here into the Quad and from Quad vice versa into. So it'll be sort of a bridge between the larger Indo-Pacific region and the West Asia, in my opinion.
In the chat, we have one question from Dr. Mukund Narvakar. He asks, how do you see India's role in Indo-Pacific, especially when China is rising rapidly with its economics and military development, and on the other hand, the US and its allies believe on a free and open Indo-Pacific? Do you see any further conflict between China and US over the space sharing in the Indo-Pacific, precisely due to the China's claim in South China Sea and all along the 9 dash lines, and how far are we getting close in the fall in the Thai-Sudis trap?
As far as there are a number of questions within this question itself.
Yeah.
Let's take the South China Sea first. Chinese 9 dash line post, they do not talk of the 9 dash line anymore after the International Court of Arbitration rulings. Now they talk of the 4 Shahs. But China has gone and changed the status quo in the South China Sea, and the genie is out of the bottle and it cannot be put back. She has, numerically, she has the largest navy in the world. May not be, the Chinese Navy at the moment is no patch or no match to the United States Navy beyond the first island chain. She has the largest maritime militia, the largest coast guard, the largest fishing fleet. So she has a huge maritime capability. And the other parties to the South China Sea disputes are tiny in size to the capability which China brings to bear on the South China Sea. The neglect or the shutting of the eye by the United States of the South China Sea in the early, say, between 2010 onwards till now, it's only now that the focus is shifted back to the Western Pacific. So she has developed capability, but I do not think there is going, the United States and China are going to go to war over the South China Sea issue. Okay. As far as the fact is, China is the second largest country economically in the world. She has an economy which is almost, say, $15 trillion. She has a huge economic muscle, and she has invested very heavily in development of the military capability in the last 30 years. No nation has invested so much in the maritime capability as China has invested in since the Second World War. In the last 5 years, they commissioned over 18 new ships and submarines. That is almost the combined new acquisitions of all the European Navy, India, and United States put together. So she has built up huge capacity, and there are economic dependencies of all the countries with China, whether it's India, whether it's United States, whether it's Australia, whether it's Japan. So there are economic interlinkages between all the countries and this thing. Now, with the Quad coming to the center stage and the refocus or rebirth in 2017, it died a very premature death when it was first elucidated in 2007 by then Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. It has gained center stage now, and it is going to, in my opinion, it's going to be a non-military alliance. I think one of the primary roles will be that it will ensure that rules, for whatever it may be, say like rules for 5G protocol, are not written by China alone. And you have an international order which is going to write these rules. And that is where the Quad and like-minded countries will play an important role. The other thing is what is happening across the Taiwan Straits. There have been large ingress of Chinese aircraft into the air defense zone of Taiwan. Whether China is going to do a military operations to reoccupy Taiwan, in my opinion, that is very unlikely to happen. It's going to be a very difficult proposition across the Taiwan Strait, and also there is the alliance between Taiwan and United States to protect Taiwan. Within the first island chain, the Chinese Navy and China has capability to deny some strategic space to the United States Navy, but beyond that, United States Navy is supreme. In my opinion, if there is ever a maritime conflict in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the United States Navy will make mincemeat of the Chinese Navy. And I think it's very unlikely. So taking into account the economic interlinkages and the military capability and development and the refocus of the United States on the Pacific and on the Indo-Pacific, I think things will gradually change and there will be denial of strategic space to China. And I think there will be alternate means of financing of infrastructure projects, which is the dire need for a lot of countries. And I think PRI is also losing its steam, and with the slowing down of the Chinese economy and their own internal trouble, whether it's economic slowdown or growth, their demographic slowdown. So there are issues internally to the Chinese itself. So I think the jury is still out. Time will tell. I think the growth rate of China will reduce, and she was post Xi Jinping. I don't know what policies China is going to adopt, whether it's going to have the same aggressive outlook, may not be the case.
True. Admiral, we have a question from the Hindu from Chennai, Dennis Jesudasan. You spoke about Malabar naval exercises in Indo-Pacific. What is your opinion on whether Milan exercises have any impact on the Indo-Pacific?
See, the Malabar exercise go back a long way. It started off in 1993 with the exercise between the United States and India. Then, and it's continued practically throughout the time, except for a couple of years in between post in 1998. Then Japan was included, and in 2020, Australia was included. The Milan is a very different thing. The Milan started off in 1996 as an initiative to bring navies of the Bay of Bengal together in Andaman and Nicobar in Port Blair. And it's held every alternate year. It used to be held in Port Blair. And gradually the participation physically of naval ships and observers grew from 6 and has grown. So then there was a call taken, now what do we do? How do we this thing? So then they thought, let's make Milan a multilateral exercise. Initially in the 90s and early till about 5 years back, the government policy was that there would be only bilateral exercises between each service. So like the Navy to Navy exercise will be a bilateral exercise with another Navy. You couldn't have a multilateral exercise. So that changed with the inclusion of Japan into Malabar. So that became a multilateral. So now when the approval was taken, so the Navy decided to make Milan a multilateral exercise. And in 2020 was the first one planned where 41 nations were invited. But unfortunately, that has to be cancelled due to COVID. So in 2022, this again being planned. I think similar number of navies will be invited, and now will be held off the coast of Visakhapatnam off the east coast. So the Malabar naval exercise is a group of 4, where United States, Australia, Japan, and India. The level of integration and sophistication of the Malabar exercises is much greater, will be much greater than Milan will ever achieve. So, and the integration and interoperability between the 4 navies of Quad are much greater than what we'll be able to achieve in Malabar. So I think we need to separate them and treat them as 2 separate silos.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much. There's one question from Times of India, Swati Bharadwaj. What is your comment on increasing closeness of Russia and China and recent joint patrol and drills? I mean, what does that take on Indo-Pacific region?
See, there is huge economic integration between Russia and China. the export of petroleum product, gas into China through pipelines. There have also been sanctions on Russia by both United States and EU on a number of issues. So the two countries have come together. But there is also, in my opinion, a degree of wariness on the side of the Russians of what the Chinese, I think their strategic interlinkages and development of ties, there will always be. There is always a question of the far east of Russia, which is practically empty. Hardly any population living there. And the question of it being occupied slowly by immigration of Chinese. So that fear is always there. There is also a wariness on the part of Russia on stealing of technologies by the Chinese. So there will be, at the moment, the pressure which is being brought to bear by the United States and other like-minded countries on both Russia and China is drawing them together. But in the long term, whether the relationships are going to go down this road, I have my doubts.
And do you find will it impact any alliances like Quad and AUKUS?
The Russia-China bonhomie at the moment? I don't think so. AUKUS is one of a kind of an agreement which is going to deliver military capability to Australia in the form of 8 nuclear submarines.
Yeah.
And there is already a strategic partnership and military alliance between United Kingdom and United States, and between United States and Australia. So this is a one of a kind strategic tie-up which will bring huge maritime capability in the form of 8 nuclear SSNs to the Australian Navy. And in my opinion, once maybe the first boat will come in 10 years' time, somewhere around 2030, it's going to complicate matters for the Chinese Navy once these boats start to deploy in the Western Pacific. So, and the Quad is an arrangement of like-minded countries, and I don't think so the China-Russia thing, if you are alluding to the fact whether Quad and AUKUS will drive Russia and China closer, I don't think so.
Yeah. There's one question from Mahesh Kumar. Do you feel the financial support from China to the under construction ports in Pakistan and Sri Lanka may give a maritime dominance to China in the Indo-Pacific region?
See, the first, let's take the story you're talking. Basically, there are 2 ports. One is Hambantota and in Sri Lanka, and the other is Gwadar in Pakistan. Hambantota was a port which the Rajapaksha brothers belong to the district where Hambantota port is located. It was the development of the Hambantota port was first offered to India, and India carried out a study and said that it is economically unviable. So then the Sri Lankans went to the Chinese and the Hambantota port was built. It was built by literally digging a hole along the coast to make the port. There is not some port in some estuary or this thing. It was built at a huge cost. And Colombo Port is a major port where transshipment of containers take place. Almost 70% of container traffic which comes to India is transshipped in the Colombo Port. So when Hambantota was commissioned, there was a rule which the Sri Lankan government laid down saying that no container transshipment will take place in Hambantota. It will only be handled in Colombo. And that was the dead kernel for the Hambantota port. So there was no traffic to Hambantota port. So it's a port which is economically unviable. They couldn't pay the loans. So now it is on a 99-year lease to the Chinese. The Sri Lankan government has promised India that it will not be used for any military purpose. So till date, no Chinese naval ship has put into Hambantota port. Whenever they have visited Sri Lanka, they have always berthed or they visited to Colombo. What future foretells, only an astrologer or some soothsayer can look at. But it's a port facility which is available and can be used by any ship, whether it's naval ships also. But at the moment, there are no indication that will be handed over. China, Sri Lanka have made it very clear that it cannot be used for military purpose. Same is the case with Gwalior. It's also a port which is uneconomically viable. There has been hardly any traffic into Gwalior port. There was one, I think 3 or 4 years back, there was a huge hoo-ha of shipment of containers by road from Xinjiang to Gwalior port. Some 300 containers were shipped by trucks all the way from there. So there is no water in Gwalior. More often than not, the Pakistan Navy sends a tanker with water to Gwalior. So now there is also an airport being built in Gwalior. But there's no hinterland, any industry, anything to support. Unless you have water, there's going to be very little economic activity is going to take place in Gwalior. The other issue which is also raised is of a pipeline from Gwalior going into China. You can imagine the length of this pipeline. From sea level, it has to go through the Himalayan range, go up to about 19,000 feet in a region which is seismically very active. And the cost of pumping oil from Gwalior across this pipeline is almost 28 or 30 times the cost of shipping 1 barrel by sea. So it's also economically unviable. So this pipeline, in my opinion, is never going to get built. But the first overseas facilities the Chinese have built, or the first logistic base or naval base which are built, is in Djibouti. That has been commissioned, and that is a facility which they have a jetty which can berth the aircraft carrier also. So it improves the logistic reach of the Chinese Navy. But these two investments in both Pakistan and Sri Lanka are facilities available. But at the moment, there are no indication that they will be used militarily. I'll stop here.
Yeah. Thank you. There's a raise in hand, Magdoum. Do you want to ask something, or should we unmute you? Any more questions from audience? Thank you, Admiral.